Hey everyone, I'm your midwife, Tanya Tringali. Welcome to the Motherwit Podcast, a show about the issues we, healthcare consumers and providers face every day as we interact with the medical system. We'll talk about its blind spots, shortcomings, and share strategies we can use to feel seen and heard, no matter which side of the table we sit on. My guest today is Florence Ann Romano. She's the author of Build Your Village, a guide to finding joy and community in every stage of life. A little bit about Florence. She was born and raised just outside of Chicago, where she spent more than 15 years as a childcare provider, during which time she was known as the Windy City Nanny. I love that. Anyway, we talk a lot on this show about the particular village building that is specific to the perinatal period and what it takes to survive and hopefully thrive in the early postpartum period. But I really wanted to have Florence Ann on because I really appreciate the way she translates the idea of needing a village to all stages of life. And I'm realizing that many of my clients have had second babies in this past year. I'm seeing second, third, and even fourth birthdays on my Instagram feed for those of you who keep in touch and are listening. So I appreciate that you are staying with me in this form of community. And I want to make sure that this episode really resonates with you as you change and grow. And I think this is also really relevant to our healthcare providers that are listening, who have often growing families as well and can benefit from this discussion as a means of preventing burnout, which is so huge in the very giving and loving work that we all do. So I digress as it pertains to introducing Florence and why she is such a badass. So Florence wears many hats that no doubt contribute to her unique perspective and expertise. In addition to being an author, she is a personal growth strategist, a philanthropist, a businesswoman. She is on the board of directors at the Children's Research Fund and a nonprofit called Female Strong that provides programs and mentorship to middle and high school age girls. And she is a founding member of Sesame Street's Leadership Council. Florence Ann, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today.
Oh, I'm so thrilled to be here. I'm shades of tomato here with your beautiful introduction there, and I'm just so excited to have this conversation because your listeners really fall into such a special group of people that are going through a very interesting chapter of their lives where community and connection are paramount, and sometimes I think also, we forget how important all that is during such a transitional time in their lives, too.
Absolutely. And I think there is a base of people, especially people who listen to the show, who know the importance of it for surviving the early days. But I think those communities often fall apart very quickly. And then we're left to try to recover that and figure out how to get it back. And I think that's what your book talks about. But before we dive in, I would love it if you would tell us a little bit more about yourself and how the book came to be and how you came to this kind of body of knowledge and becoming so passionate in this general idea.
Right. Well, you had mentioned I had been a nanny for over 15 years in my life. So obviously I've been sold out for kids for a long time and have wanted to, be an advocate for families and children and all the different forms that they come in for a very long time. And then after I was no longer a nanny, as Mary Poppins would say, you stay until the wind changes. And the wind changed for a lot of different reasons at the time. But after I retired from being a nanny, I started a digital content company and at the same time decided to write my first book, and that was a children's book to help children understand the transition of being cared for by their parents to being cared for by a nanny or a caretaker. Because at the time, over 64% of families in America had a nanny or a caretaker or daycare or whatever it might be, and I thought, gosh, that is a jarring statistic. It is not something that is indicating it is just a trend in our society. It's part of our culture, and we need to pay attention to this, that it takes a community, it takes a village, and people are relying on other people to help them raise their children. And so after I wrote that book and went out and did a lot of media and childcare advocacy and things about all regarding that, COVID hit, a few years later. And I started to kind of look around at the landscape of our lives. And in a global way, we all knew what it felt like to go through something together in a global way. I'll say that again, because that is so unique to COVID, to our situation. We're going through a global pandemic like that. But the one common denominator we all had was that we knew what it felt like to lose our support systems. Where did everybody go? We couldn't be with people anymore. You couldn't rely on childcare. You couldn't rely on your community or your village or your tribe or your girls or your guys the way you did before. And so now I started thinking about that proverb, it takes a village to raise a child. And I thought, okay, yeah, that makes sense. That's true. But what about the people that don't have children? Don't they deserve to find their community too? Doesn't everybody deserve to find their people? And so I wanted to write a book that answered that question that you hear moms specifically bemoan. Where's the phone number to the village? Where are the directions to the village? Where's the roadmap? And so I wanted to write that book and give the directions to the village, but I wanted it to be inclusive. I wanted everyone to feel like no matter what they were born into, where they were born, whatever their case may be, that they deserved to find their people and had that power within them to do that for themselves. And I wanted it to be a book that was relatable, that you didn't pick up and think, gosh, I'm not going to do any of this. This is way too hard. I wanted it to be something you could wrap your mind around, run your fingers through. So I created 6 archetypes of villagers that you identify with. Who am I of these 6 people, and who do I need of these 6 people in my village? Because we all like to relate to something, to feel like we can see ourselves in other people or in other things. We're visual learners in that way. So that created a space for me during COVID to write Build Your Village.
Awesome. Well, you've piqued my interest, and I already want to know what the 6 villages are.
That's my favorite part, is I'm going to give you the 6, and I'm not even going to give you a definition attached to them because I'm not even going to say it. I'm not going to give you the definition attached because after I do, I want to see what your reaction is, Tanya. So the 6 are accepting, dependable, communicator, cheerleader, organizer, and healer. Now, now the reason I didn't want to say anything or give a definition to them was because I was watching your face during it. And I could see that you already were starting to cast people in your life into those roles automatically, weren't you? I'm guessing?
Yes, that was happening. And it was also, I was casting myself already,
there you go. Yes.
Yeah.
So who, just without a definition attached, who do you think of those 6? And you can be all 6. You don't have to just choose one. But let's just the sake of this conversation, out of those 6, did you identify with one of those 6 more than the others?
The one that reached the top of the list was healer. My analogy here is this is not about building a real life village. It's a fictional situation, but for whatever reason, a thought that I have had many times in my life is if there was ever a zombie apocalypse, the only way I'm going to find a home of people to protect me, because I wouldn't know how to protect myself, is to say I'll be the healer of the group, because it's historically always the midwife who has the broadest base of skills to make sure that a group of people is taken care of. So I have always known, that's what I have to give to a group, and I have to pitch that idea hard so that these other people will save my life.
That's really a fabulous analogy, actually. And I would like to be with you. If that ever happened, I think I need to be with you during that zombie apocalypse. I think, because you know what, you really are in your line of work, in your expertise and how you show your love to the world. The healer, at least in the definition that I give in the book, is not the person that's there to fix you or to fix the situation, to fix all your problems. They're there to walk with you through it, whatever the it is. They're the North Star in your life. And I can see from your energy that is exactly what you are. And what you give to this world, who you bring into this world, how you create that space for that very majestic and magical moment for these people, that definitely lends itself to being the healer in so many different respects. And so I love that you were thinking, who am I of those 6? And I always say, as you do this work, as you figure out who you are and, who you need, it's important that we remember it can't always be just about us We have to step outside ourselves and live that life in service of others and figure out how do we show up for other people, because it actually is in showing up for other people that we learn so much about ourselves too and what we need. And so it's this kind of circle. It's this reciprocity that we have. But I'll tell you what, the hardest thing for people to do, I think next to public speaking in this world, is asking for help.
Absolutely.
And that's what this is. This community building, this connection, this human connection. This is about being vulnerable, and it's about honesty. And that's not easy for people to do. So this work that I'm asking people to participate in, there is a number one overarching requirement to it. And that is, you have to want it. I can't make you. You can't make we can't make anyone want this, want to connect, want to change this for themselves and their lives. But there comes a point, I think, especially now in our world today, where mental health and emotional well-being is suffering so much, that we are starting to see people put this in the forefront of their minds.
Well, and I think people deeply want to be wanted or needed. And
Yes.
yet we have such a hard time asking for it. But many times people are thrilled that you did ask. And I think that's what,
Absolutely.
and I'm as guilty as the next person when it comes to not being able to ask for help. I think that this is a very modern problem.
Yes.
And many of us have it.
Yes.
So I'm not
Yes.
excluding myself, but I'm almost always surprised the way in which people step up for me when I need it, even when I haven't even quite asked. Just by opening up, people will come forward and start to fill roles or gaps, I suppose.
Right. Yes, fill the gaps. Yep, exactly. But you mentioning, how hard it is to ask for that help. And then, you're mentioning people who almost kind of anticipate your needs too. And those are different types of people. There's different categories, different capacities people show up for you in your life, depending on their relationship with you, the proximity to you, whatever it might be. But I think one of the overarching reasons people don't want to ask for help is it's beyond just feeling that they might seem weak. It's also the idea that you don't want to have a debt to someone. I think people are always worried that it's tit for tat. If I'm going to ask for help, then that I'm going to owe that person something, and they're going to be sitting there waiting until I pay that debt back. And that's a really hard way to live, thinking that.
Yeah, that's a really, really interesting point. And one way in which I feel like the aging process is teaching me that that's not a true statement is I can now, at this point in my life, in my mid-40s, look back and think about earlier times in my life when I had older friends who really took care of me in a very particular kind of way. And now that I'm getting older, I do have some friends that are younger than me, and I have stepped in to take care of them in a similar way. And so I'm not giving back to the people who gave to me per se, but I'm giving in a way that I learned from other people who are older than me how to give to the next generation, let's say. And you feel that rhythm of life happen in that way. So maybe people can let go of some of that angst or fear if they just think about that circle of life, that larger circle.
But I think that's also a really important point about how you are helping the next generation or the people younger than you learn how to take care of one another. And that's an important piece as well, because, and I say this in the book, you can't expect people to be what you want them to be. You have to accept them for who they are, where they are in their life, not where you want them to be, not what you think they should be. And relationships, whether romantic, platonic, whatever it is, it's all kind of the same rules. There's an energy that, brings you to a person. There's a chemistry. There's all of that exists in friendships too. And there's a reason you decide to be friends with a person, or you decide to have someone in your life. But I think we also kind of like wax poetic, poetic about this idea that, friendships and love and all of it is all just, hugs and flowers and gumdrops. But there's a lot of work that goes into these relationships, and what happens when it's not perfect, when it's a lot less than perfect, when I talk about the village burning down, when the village is lost. The village is lost for a lot of different reasons: falling outs, breakups, divorce, death, things like that. Those things are just as important for us to concentrate on as the rest of the stuff is when it's all positive, when you're looking for that support in your life. We have to look at the whole picture, because life isn't fair. Life isn't perfect. We don't live in a nirvana, so I don't pretend that the work that we do in this relationship building is supposed to lead you to this holy grail, and it's this perfect plan. It's this perfect roadmap. It's going to be messy, and things in your life are not going to go according to plan. But the whole point is there should always be a place for you to come back home to, where you can figure out, where can I take control in my life where I feel like I've lost control. That's what hopefully building your village does for you, is no matter what age you are or season you are in your life, that you have a place you can come back to and work these steps and know that you can take control and find connection and figure this out for yourself. And I think that's important.
So on that note, when you say work these steps, I was just thinking about how your book is intended to be a bit of I'm going to say two things: a how-to book, but
yes.
also it's about deep introspection, because it's not just like step 1, ask for help. Step 2, it wouldn't be a book if it was that simple. But it's about like, why do we have the barriers to these seemingly simple steps? So let's back it up a bit, because I think, of course, I have a bad habit of just diving right in, which is what I did with you.
I do
too.
I do too.
But now I'm like, wait a minute. The listeners are probably going, I'm not quite sure how we got there. So take us to the beginning. Say somebody is at whatever stage of life it is that they're realizing that they've got this empty space that really needs a village. What is the first step, and how do they roll this out, kind of a little bit more practically speaking?
So I give a lot of different examples from my own life in the book and other people's lives in the book. I talk about some very trying times for me. I froze my eggs when I was 35 and went through IVF and did all of that. And, that took a toll on me emotionally and physically, and it changed how I was showing up for people. It changed how I was behaving in other people's villages. It changed who I needed in mine. So I give a lot of examples about real life situations. But one of the first things I think that people should do when they don't know what to do first, they know that there are gaps, they know that there are voids. And I'm going to use an example for a very good friend of mine, one of my best friends. She moved to Texas about a year and a half ago. Knew not a soul there. She moved for her husband's job, her 2 kids, and she was terrified. Absolutely terrified to do it, because she did not know how she was going to start over. She was part of a huge family here, an enormous support system, all of her girlfriends, and this was basically her worst fear. And so we talked a lot about it. But I said to her, okay, reasonably, you're going to meet people through your kids, because your kids are going to be in school, they're going to be in daycares and things like that. You'll meet other parents. But what about you? Like, what's going to satiate you? How are you going to invent yourself or reinvent yourself there? And so I started talking to her about philanthropy. And I really believe that this is a great first step for people out there who move to a new city or need to meet new people and don't necessarily know how to do it. Start looking in your community at things that interest you in terms of charity or giving back, and do that research, because once you go and you have that first meeting, or you go to an event and you start to meet like-minded people, have similar values to you, that your hearts beat for the same reason, same cause, you're going to start to grow your community. You're going to meet new people, but you're also going to do something that's important to you. It's 2 birds with 1 stone in that way. But that is a safe way, I would say, a seemingly safe way, an easier way to go and put yourself out there, because you're going to be in a place that feels comfortable for you, because you're all there for a reason. So that's my first piece of advice for people out there who are looking for that first step. That's a nice first step to make.
Yeah, and I think that can be looked at really broadly depending on what's going on in one's life. So I can imagine that perhaps the idea of going to certain kinds of groups could feel overwhelming to some personality types. But again, it's no different than when I talk to moms about needing to find other moms with other kids. So usually, I've talked about this a few times on the show, but just for the sake of this conversation, when the work I do with people is fading out, oftentimes around 12 weeks postpartum, I'm like, okay, now what you don't need anymore is like a healthcare provider and therapist kind of in the mix. You've got to find your village, because they need to fill this void, because I haven't had to talk about poopy diapers for 23 years, and I'm not going to keep talking about poopy diapers with you. You've got to find people who are dealing with poopy diapers now. Like, they are your people.
The people that are in that similar stage of life as you. Yes.
So it can be as simple as a mom's group. It can be as simple as going to the park. In other ways, it can be find your exercise groove and meet people there. It might not be, the meetups that are more in the realm of business and all of the other things, which I think will come for many people in time when they can find their inner interests again.
Yeah. But you know what? There's a season for it, right?
Absolutely.
Right now the poopy diaper season is that season, and you need to find people that can relate to what you're going through, because no matter what, I think one thing we all want, no matter our age, race, creed, background, anything, we all want to be seen, heard, and understood. So, figure out what that means to you in that moment of your life. And, you're talking about something that is very specific, but, a friend of mine the other day, she just had her second baby, and she's about a little over a month postpartum. And she was saying she feels like she's in this fog that she remembers, like going through this with her daughter, a few years ago, and she's very happy, but also questioning everything again, and questioning herself, and second guessing and third guessing. And, once the visits stop from the people that want to see the new baby, and the meal train ends and all of that, and, you're left, surviving. And that's basically what she tells me all the time, is she feels like she's just surviving. I said to her, then what does help look like for you right now? If that's how you feel, what can I do to help? What do you need right now? And, I think there is a very specific transition that we're kind of alluding to here right now that happens after the newness and the shininess of that new baby. And then you're left, living your life, and surviving is the key word here. And how does your village show up for you? And then also what's hard is someone like her, who is a people pleaser, feels bad because she thinks she's not being a very good friend, and she's just all caught up in herself right now. And she's feeling guilty about that amidst everything else that she's dealing with. So there's a lot of combative with internally combative feelings, conflicting feelings. And that can be very difficult to navigate alone, certainly, and even worse if you don't feel like you have a place that you can talk about it.
Okay, so let's assume that people have found their way to start accessing community members.
Yeah.
How do I say this? Is it important to know what you are capable of, and then not cast the members of what you think you are good at yourself? Or is it the case that regardless of what you think you're good at, you deserve another person to fill that role for you, rather than you having less cast members, so to speak, and trying to do more yourself? I don't know if I just said that clearly.
No, I think I'm tracking. So, it is this quality versus quantity situation. I am not telling you to go out there and, get 100 friends because that's going to make you happy. Some of the people I know in my life who are extremely busy have, a cobweb of, calendar to deal with. They're some of the loneliest people I know too. So quantity does not necessarily equate to happiness here. It is the quality of those friendships. I think as we get older, we realize that, you care less about what people think of you. You care less, about, pleasing people. And you also know that, collecting friends like you would not, like cards, like novelty cards, that's not what you're supposed to be doing. So going back to this idea of, casting the people that you need in your life, you can have more than one of these villagers. You may have 6 accepting villagers. You may have, whatever it may be, that amount can vary. But knowing thyself is very important, knowing what you're not capable of. And to go back to my IVF example, when I was going through that, and I would like to think that I'm probably all 6 of those villagers, but I'm not all 6 to every single person in my life. It depends on the person. I know at that time when I was going through IVF that I was absolutely incapable of being the organizer villager. And that's something I can usually do. I can organize the social things and the meetups and the dinners and the walks and this and that. At that time, I wanted nothing to do with it. I just wanted people to kind of leave me alone. I wanted to do my own thing. I wanted to be in my bubble. So I was no longer operating in that capacity for people. And I know that friends and family felt me pull back in that way. And there probably was some sort of void there because someone wasn't making the social arrangements like they were used to. They counted on me to be the one that kind of orchestrated a lot of things to get people together. Now they had to do that on their own because I wanted to pull back. And so I was very honest with people at that time, saying I just was not capable of giving more than I was at that point, and trying not to apologize for it, though I did, because I just can't help myself. I felt bad about that. And of course, they were good friends and said, please don't feel like you have to apologize. Thank you for being honest about it. But I had people stepping in at my life at that time then that were filling villager roles that I hadn't needed in a long time or ever. I really never needed, I got, what's the best way to say this? I suppose I usually was the dependable one. So then all of a sudden, the dependable villagers were kind of coming to me. I was delegating a lot of different things to people. And normally I was very happy to be the one who was kind of taking charge. And so I didn't ever really realize different friends of mine were actually dependable villagers until they started showing up that way in my life. And so it was almost refreshing to see that I was now seeing my friends and family in a different way, in a different light. I didn't realize they had certain qualities that they had. And I was like, gosh, this is amazing. I have to honor this in them because this is new. They're teaching me something about what I needed, teaching me something about them. And I think they learned something about themselves through it. So that's a very long-winded way. And hopefully I answered your questions there about how these roles can change, and they ebb and they flow and they permeate. And depending on the time in your life, you are going to be able to do things and not able to do things. And that's okay. But again, the common denominator here is being honest about what you can and cannot do and what you do and do not need.
Did you know that less than 15% of people meet guidelines for recommended amounts of physical activity during pregnancy? As healthcare providers, it is our duty to promote health and wellness throughout the lifespan, and the perinatal period is all too often overlooked. Our clients look to us for guidance on this, and we do the best we can with the knowledge we have, but that's often based on a combination of life experiences, common sense, and myths. My new course, Exercise in the Perinatal Period for Healthcare Providers, is designed for providers who are motivated to improve their ability to support their clients in getting or staying active throughout the perinatal period, including their postpartum return to fitness. Click the link in the show notes to learn more. Are you pregnant or a new parent looking to ensure a better postpartum experience? Or are you a birth worker looking to improve your postpartum care skills? Check out Thriving After Birth, an online self-paced course by me, midwife and educator Tanya Tringali. It's 10 and a half hours of video content featuring experts in lactation, mental health, pelvic floor health, pediatric sleep issues. You also get worksheets and a workbook, as well as options to have a one-on-one session with me. Sign up at motherwitmaternity.com/thriving, and let's improve postpartum care together. I think in your book you talk about kind of miscasting people. I don't know why I've sort of put this twist on it like it's a play, but
that's exactly it, though. Yes, it is a play. You are casting it like a play or a movie. These are the main characters in your life. That's exactly what you're doing.
So I think in your book you talked about when you cast a character incorrectly. So what I'm hearing, though, is, okay, there are times when the person cast in a certain role isn't living up to their expectations, and we make space for that. But how do we know whether we asked someone to play a part that they're not capable of?
There's, we always laugh about like firing your friends. Like somebody, like they read the book and they were like, I got to fire some of these friends. That's what I realized after reading your book. And I started laughing and I said, you say it in a funny way, but it's actually truthful. Sometimes you do need to fire people from certain positions. And sometimes people fire themselves. It just kind of, fades away, relationships, that happens in relationships too. But the point of the incorrectly casting people, sometimes you need to look at your cast of characters and realize that you need to shuffle the deck, or you need to recast in some sort of way, or you need to realize that you were putting expectations on people that were unfair. And what I mean by that is, you might be looking to one of your friends to be your healer, but they don't have the skill set to do that. But you in your mind have set them up to be your healer, and they keep failing you over and over again, and they're letting you down, and it's ruining the relationship. But because you have expectations on this person that are not appropriate, it's not playing to their skill set. So instead of them being your healer, maybe they're the organizer, maybe they're the dependable one, maybe they're the accepting one. So recast them in a role that's going to set them up for success. Again, it's not about what I want you to be. It's me accepting who you are and where you are in your life, and going forward in that way, and building the relationships in that way. It's not fair for us and to put expectations on people, and that's across the board. I think that's why we get in so much trouble in relationships, is you expect people to read your mind, expect them to just know what you need, and you don't advocate for yourself. How many times do you hear that in romantic relationships where they're like, you should just know what I need, or just know what I want? It's not fair.
Right. Oh, absolutely. It's the death of many, many, many marriages and romantic relationships. Totally agree.
Right.
So this is sounding like it's abutting the idea of boundaries.
Yes. Boundaries. It's a dirty word, isn't it?
Totally. But we may get asked to fill a role that we can't fulfill.
Right.
But we feel guilty and we say yes anyway, and then we fail and we beat ourselves up, and then we let the other person down, and it's a vicious cycle, and we keep beating ourselves up for it. So it seems like it's a two-way street, right? We are asking people to be a part of our community, but we also have to be honest about what we can do.
Yes. And in terms of boundaries, I'm going to use the accepting villager as an example, because someone was just talking to me about this idea of, okay, the accepting villager definition that I give in the book is the non-judgmental one in your life, the one you can confide in, the one you can tell your secrets to. Okay, let's use that as a definition here of the accepting villager. Can you be an accepting villager with someone that you don't necessarily have a deep relationship with? There's a boundary that you have with a person in your life. And I caution people to not get caught up in these definitions so by the book. You have to also live your life according to what works for you, your value system, what your definitions of things are too. These definitions are malleable. But can you be an accepting villager to someone that you have a surface relationship with because you've put that boundary there? And this is something I actually have in my own life, some in my own life. I accept them for who they are, flaws and all. And they're a family member. They have to be in my life in some sort of way. But I know that I don't feel safe in that relationship to tell that person my deepest, darkest secrets. Mm-hmm. But I have created that boundary where we just don't go that deep. But I accept that that's who that person is, and that those are the limitations. And so that's an example I want to give people, and hopefully it was a positive example for people to know that there can be different levels of boundaries that you have within all 6 of these archetypes, depending on the person and depending on the relationship you have to have with that person. Because, it's easy to say, I don't want to be around people that are toxic. I don't want to be... Sometimes we don't get to make that choice. So we have to figure out boundaries so that we can stay safe in those relationships and in our environments. So all of that applies here too to those 6 archetypes as well. It's creating those boundaries and applying them where necessary and necessary to how you need them to be.
This comes up so often in the work I do with people, in that during the last few weeks of pregnancy, we're often preparing as best we can for postpartum. And so much of that is asking yourself the hard questions about who have you already invited into your space during this time, and how are you feeling about that? Because usually by the time I start working with people are already feeling really anxious about a small number of people that have kind of interjected themselves into the situation, or that they felt they couldn't say no to, right? And so we kind of break down all the options, whether that be the most extreme version, which is let's not have them come, which doesn't happen very often, but once in a blue moon, all the way to how can we kind of fit them into what they're capable of. So it's interesting to hear you saying this, and we're thinking about life outside and well beyond this. And it's the same exact skill sets, it's the same conversation that for the people who I've done this with anyway, I think they can really relate. And hopefully what's happening is they're continuing to do this with themselves onward in their lives. What is this person capable of, so that they don't have to feel let down, I don't have to feel let down, so that we don't create kind of a clash.
Right.
And just taking that skill into the future of your life. Everything you just said to me made perfect sense. It's just that I see it through the lens of this, narrow, very, very deeply transitional time in life. But yeah, we have all these transitions in life, and I can see how this logic holds throughout. Right. Lately, I've even been thinking about the aging process and moving into later life.
Right.
I, like many of my listeners, I'm sure, are having loved ones getting very old and watching that transition happen. And I think we see that loneliness creep back in. And I think that's something we all have to get ahead of.
Right. Yes. Because you don't want to be that person that doesn't have anyone, right, when you're older. And we've all been there. I mean, in high school, my gosh, one of the volunteer opportunities that I had was at an elderly home. And I remember walking down the halls and, never seeing visitors, with some of these people. And it just breaks my heart. It can make me cry right now, even thinking about it. I mean, I grew up in an old-fashioned, old-school Italian family. It was a multi-generational home. My grandparents lived with us. It was the best. And I used to be the one that stayed in the hospital whenever they would have to go to the hospital. I mean, that wasn't the best, but not being in the hospital, but I would be the one with them. I'd stay overnight and do all of that. And the same thing, I'd walk the halls and I would see people in those hospital rooms never having anyone there, no one with them. And we never left my Nana or Papa alone a second. So we were lucky, of course, but what about the people that aren't lucky like that? And that's going back to what I said in the beginning is no matter what you were born into, if you weren't born into a situation like I was, that you had tons of cousins and extended family around all the time, but you want a family tree, but you want community, you want a village, you want people, then I want people to feel empowered to do that. I want you to feel like no matter what, you deserve to have that and you can create it for yourself. But like you're saying, as we get older and our mortality comes into, question, and we wonder what our life is going to look like when we're older and who's going to be around us, that's why this work is so important, because you are setting yourself up in the future for hopefully a rich and meaningful life in whatever way that is for you in terms of connection.
Yeah, and just to bring it back to the present moment for most people, I hadn't, until we kind of got to this part of the conversation, thought about casting members who are in our older generation. So our parents' generation up to potentially grandparents or great aunts and uncles. But there's such a richness there. One of my cousins right now, her youngest child is, I think about 8. And she's recently started having her father do childcare on Wednesdays after school. And the stories of the 8-year-old and the 70-year-old bonding have been like blowing my mind. And it's just beautiful. I mean, I think we're really, that's something we've lost in modern times with the moving away from families and all of that. But I hadn't even really thought about what it means to cast those people into these roles as well.
And I love that perspective. I think it sounds like you had a similar, family dynamic, perhaps as mine, where you had a lot of cousins, or you had, at least extended family around. And the truth is, you look back in time, and we aren't supposed to do life alone. There were villages for a reason. People did raise their children together in these villages, and there was something very special about that. And we have to be able to take the old school and new school and make some sort of hybrid there. And I do think we are losing the appeal and losing the sacredness of those multi-generational relationships. I know I'm a very different person because of the environment that I was raised in. I always tell, this is, I guess, a little tip from me to you, for anyone who does have older people in your family or in your friendship circle, take your phone out and record them telling stories, because believe me, you are going to want it. I can't tell you how often we watch old movies and old videos of Nana and Papa telling stories and things like that. You want it, and you think you'll remember, and you don't remember. Putting an emphasis on what you're saying right now, these multi-generational relationships, and what can we learn from our elders, and seeing the relationship between a 70-year-old and an 8-year-old, and the kind of the magic that happens there as they both are looking through the world through their own lenses, but also teaching each other things too. It's really incredible. And I think that also, begs the question of, how are we being good students in life? Who are we learning from? Who are we creating space for in our lives, and what gifts are they giving us? What are they learning? How are they watering us? All of that. Because I always say, and I talk about this in the book, being kind of a mosaic inside of you, this collection of people and experiences that you kind of pull from in your life. I go into this mosaic in my heart, I would say, and I pull out these different things that I've learned from different people. Some of it is not always positive, but I've learned something from it, and that's part of the mosaic too. So I love what you're saying. I love that you're saying that we need to think about not just our counterparts, people that are our age, who are all the different teachers in our lives.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think one of the last things I would love to touch on here is, in kind of sticking with this line of logic here, where we're talking about modern life and the ways in which having a village and a community has changed. It's not just inherent anymore, and we have to really build it. Mm-hmm. I also was thinking about, as I was reading through parts of your book, I was thinking about how, for many of us, I think we have multiple communities that we feel beholden to, mm-hmm. and that can become its own stressor as well, because we can be, and I think you were just saying something along these lines, different, we are a different person to each person that we are part of a community with. Right. And we have communities that maybe overlap like little Venn diagrams, but they're not all right. one. And right. you can feel a little almost frantic. Who am I to this group? Who am I to right. that group? Am I holding right. up my end of the bargain in this group? And now I can't do it for this group. So I think we can take on too much. Right. Even right. when we're in a place where we feel like we haven't even filled every role in our own circle. Right. So how do we navigate that?
Well, I also think it's about people also managing the expectation about what it looks like to show up for people. What are these gestures that we're talking about? In the book, I have what are gut checks and action steps. The gut checks are what did I learn obviously from this chapter, and then the action steps are what can I do today? Not tomorrow, not a month from now, not 6 years from now. What can I actually do today to put all this into action? Because like I said before, we've all read those books where you're like, this is way too difficult. I don't want to do any of this. I want you to feel like this is doable. It's not such a heavy lift. So the idea that everything has to be big. Everything has to be showy. Everything has to be an enormous gesture or an enormous expression of love in order for it to be meaningful or valuable. I want to get rid of that idea that it's so much smaller than that. In life, oftentimes it is the small things that lead to big results. And so the example I want to give here is if you feel like I have all these different communities, I have all these subgroups, these secondary villages that I'm a part of, and am I doing a good job? We can make ourselves crazy if we sit around all day wondering if we're actually being a good friend or a good husband or a good wife or a good girlfriend or all of that. I mean, we could make ourselves absolutely nuts doing that evaluation on a day-to-day basis. And that's a rabbit hole no one wants to go down. But if you can start to think about what are the things I can do today to again go back to make people feel seen, heard, and understood, something small to remind people that you matter, that they're seen, that they're not invisible, especially with the mental health crisis in our world that it is today. I always say, take out your phone. You're on it anyway. Take out your phone. Look at your text messages. And I always keep text message threads open for certain people that maybe I don't talk to very often or I've talked to recently that I know is going through a hard time. I scroll through. I see, who I need to check in on. I send one simple text message that says wellness check with an exclamation point, because I always have to use some sort of emojis or exclamation points. And that is the signal to that person that when they're ready, tell me how you're doing. And they can get back to me the next day or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. But it's me popping in that moment, just letting them know that they're not forgotten and that I'm here if they need me when they're ready. And that's a small thing you can do, very easy, scrolling through your phone, send a few of those text messages out and let the person reach back when they're ready. It's a small gesture, but my goodness, can I tell you, when someone texts me on a day where it's particularly bad or whatever is going on, and I'll get a text that says, I don't know, you just popped in my mind, just want you to know that I love you or I'm proud of you or whatever it is. And you're like, how did you know that I needed this today? Yeah. And you know what? You have to follow those instincts and those kind of intuition, kind of bred moments. But that's just a small example of something you can do. And also, again, you're on your phone all the time. Put in your phone, in your calendar, a reminder to also remind you to call someone when you're in the car tomorrow on your way to a meeting when you have 10 minutes or something like that, and you leave them a voicemail. Whatever it is, do something like that.
Yeah, that really spoke to me, because I think I've heard from enough people that they feel that they've dropped some big balls. And I think the balls get dropped because they set their own bar too high.
Bingo.
And
right.
I'm really piecing that together now. And yeah, these small gestures really do go a long way. It took me a little while to make this transition. It sounds a little neurotic, but I outright schedule time in my Google Calendar with friends. When somebody texts and says, can you talk? I'm like, I have time next week. Let's put something on the calendar. And then we actually sit down and have a proper video chat that's scheduled. And right. I'm actually making the time for it, rather than trying to squeeze it in at a time that maybe wasn't totally right, but I wanted to take advantage of every free moment. It's felt much more intentional and a lot less stressful. And that's really worked for me to keep in touch with people.
And I love that. Again, it's what works for you. And like you said, it's making you also feel like you are also showing up in the ways that mean something to you, because we also want to make ourselves proud. When we go to sleep at night, we want to know that we did a good job that day. We all want that validation the same way we want to give it to other people. So figuring out what that means. Again, it's small things. It also could be big gestures too. That happens. There's times in your life where you're going to be that person that does do that big gesture or whatever it might be. But again, it's about figuring out how you can do this in your life, and it can be consistent. It can become a practice. And that is what this is too. Mm-hmm. It is a practice. Just like anything in life that is worth it, it is going to take effort. But the intensity of that effort is not always going to be the same. Some days, just like in life, we always tell, people, what do they always say about, is there actual balance in life that, that, and moms talk about that all the time. And I always say that it's not about living necessarily a balanced life in this like holistic way. It's a day-to-day thing. Some days are going to be more balanced than others. Mm-hmm. Some days you're going to be a better wife than you are a daughter that day, or a better friend than you are a spouse, whatever it is. That's, I think, the secret sauce to it all, is evaluating yourself on a daily basis like that and thinking, where did I win and where am I going to work on more tomorrow? Mm-hmm. And that's what it should be. Stop putting so much pressure on ourselves.
Yeah. Anything else that you really want to add that I maybe veered off path and you feel like it's like essential to get out there about your book?
No, I'm just happy to have had this space with you. And for those of you that are listening, if the first step for you is connecting with me because you need someone to reach out to talk to about this stuff and you don't know what to do, I'm here. I'm your virtual village in that way. You can reach out to me, whether you send me an email or you go to my website or you follow me on social or whatever it might be. If that's the first step you need, I answer every DM. So please don't feel like you can't reach out.
Yeah, share your Instagram, because I will say I love what you do on Instagram. It's very particular. You're not trying to fit into the mold of what everybody else is doing. Like when the latest dance song or meme comes around and everybody does that same post, you don't do that, and I really appreciate that. You're kind of like looking at the camera straight and you're talking about something that's very real. And I think that for our families that are growing and aging and our healthcare providers who are dealing with their professional life up against their personal life, some of the things that I've heard you talk about are really poignant. And I think people can really appreciate that and get little snippets of inspiration. So share your Instagram.
Yeah, so Florence Ann Romano, Facebook, Instagram, you could just go there and find me, or florenceann.com. I also have blogs and all sorts of things and a newsletter if you're interested in any of that too. But truthfully, just connect with me. And I thank you for saying that. I don't like to do the trendy stuff. I like to just keep it real, and I just care more about the connection than all that. So I'm here for you. Whatever you might need, I really am.
Awesome. I'll make sure all your details are in the show notes. Anything else you want to pop in there, you just let me know.
Thank you. This has been so joyful. I appreciate you so much.
Thank you for listening to the Mother Whip podcast. If any of the issues we discussed today resonate with you or your experience, I'd love to hear from you. Leave me a voicemail at 917-310-0573, or better yet, email me a voice memo at tanya@motherwhipmaternity.com. I really want to hear what worked for you, what didn't work, what support you'd wished you had, how you got through the tough times, how you advocated for yourself, or especially any tips you want to share with our listeners. I want to hear all of it. And if you'd really like to work together, you can get a discount on your first consultation with me at motherwhipmaternity.com using the code FIRSTCONSULT, 10% off. That's 10% symbol, all one word. Okay, that's all. It's wonderful being in community with you all. Thanks again for listening, and see you next time.
And remember, listeners, nothing we discuss on this show should ever be considered medical advice. Please speak to your local provider about anything that comes up in this show that resonates with you and your needs and your health care.